I want to share with you briefly a moment from my heart. For there's the assumption by many that the pastor looks at things politically. But when I speak about friendship, it moves beyond any political motivation. I've been blessed in this community to have some wonderful people who I call friends. Not to be politically correct, but people that God has placed in my life. A few days ago, a friend of mine called me and said, I want you to know that I want to share with you first before I make a public announcement. Because of our friendship, I plan to run for Attorney General. That was Josh Shapiro. I value his friendship, but also value the friendship of Rabbi Gregory Marx and his charming wife, Laurie. More than 20 years ago, the relationship started. If you come into my office, you will see a picture of him and I building bridges. And we have built bridges along life's way. I've come to appreciate Bethlehem, the people there. Very seldom do my wife and I go to Pumpernicks on Friday without meeting somebody from Bethlehem. At the same time, I've had opportunity to share with them in their journey as well as share with our journey. I'm grateful for how God has put us two together as we walk in our own faith journey. There's nothing superficial about our relationship. It's authentic. And I'm grateful that God has allowed me to call him friend. I've learned so much about who I am and what God calls of us. One of the remarkable things that I saw early on in our relationship when I went to Bethlehem was to see fathers kissing their sons. And many African Americans choose not to do that, and so consequently, sons in many ways grow up without having any sense of what it means to be affectionate. I've learned so many things about life, and we've journeyed together to the Frederick Douglass Home, the Holocaust Museum. We even had an opportunity to share our differences, and those differences have maintained itself in genuine relationships. So today, probably for about the 8th or 9th time in the 30 years I've been here, he's our preacher. Amen. And I pray the Lord will grant me many more years for him to come and stand behind this sacred desk, as well as for our relationship to increase. I call them friends. I pray that you call them friends. And so I'm going to ask them to come and bring the word. I'm going to ask our men to sing. And then I want you to give him a good shout out by simply saying amen when he stands here to proclaim the word.
have one question that I'd like to ask, and it haunts me every time I come to a worship service. It penetrates my soul, and it is this question: why can't my choir sing like this choir? On behalf of the members of Congregation Beth, I greet you with a warm and a loving shalom. We worship in different ways, but we worship in the same house, literally and figuratively. Could I ask, I know some of them stood when we welcomed the guests, could I ask those members of Congregation Beth who have come here this morning to stand, just so we can recognize them, including the lovely Laurie Singer Marx? So I'm going to start this morning on a little dark side, and I hope to bring you some light at the end. I want to talk for just a moment before I give my sermon about something that has been troubling me for the last several days, and that is about El Chapo and Sean Penn. Now, I have to begin by telling you on the dark side, if we do not believe in arrogance, then we see it in the press every day. Here is a man, an evil man, who had everything, an army, more money than he wanted, but somehow he wanted a movie about himself. And as a result of wanting that movie, he is now in prison again. Arrogance is evil. And let's not spare a moment for Sean Penn. He's an actor. And yet he was going to go down to Mexico and teach America about the futility and the ignorance of the war on drugs. And while he recognized that it was a failure, I am troubled by the mere fact that he would go against the Mexican government, know where he was, report on it, and somehow feather his own nest. That is also arrogance, and it needs to be condemned. So now I want to begin with my sermon for this morning, and I want to start, again, as I mentioned, with a little darkness. I read a recent book called The Rise and Fall of Great Civilizations by a Yale professor, and his name is Paul Kennedy. And Paul Kennedy teaches us a word that I'd like to teach you. It's called Fissile. Now, Fissile means fission. Basically, when things are held together over time, they will start falling apart. There will be fission, and there will be fractures in society, which will ultimately, as he argues, lead to the demise of all great civilizations. Now, Paul Kennedy said that 2015 was a year of Fissile. We have seen more division and more dissension within our societies than ever before. And yes, things were terrible as well in the 50s and 60s, but what we're seeing now is equally troubling, and it seems to be getting worse. And he argues that 2016 will be worse than 2015. Fissile, the coming apart at the very seam of the fabric that holds us together. Let's just take a look around the world briefly, if you would allow me to do so. Saudi Arabia and the Shiite communities in the Middle East, Fissile. Russia and Crimea, Fissile. Russia and China, Fissile. China and Vietnam, Fissile. And let's say, and I say this with all humility, here in America, the African American community and many minorities and the police departments of many great American cities, Ferguson, Baltimore, Chicago, Philadelphia, Fissile. Europe. There are people who celebrated the European Union, countries coming together that spoke different languages, but now it seems, over the immigration from North Africa and the Middle East, Fissile. There are those who want to build a wall and there are those who want to welcome. And the country is coming apart at the seams. You see radical right politicians and left politicians, and there seems to be an erosion of the center. And it concerns us all. Fissile. Let's talk about the Middle East. In Israel, Fatah and Hamas. Fissile. Israel, Jews and Palestinians. Fissile. Even within the Jewish community, there are a growing segment of radical right who refuse to see any possibility for compromise, and then there is an equally large side of people who say, no, there needs to be a two-state solution. Israel is suffering from fissile. Here in America, rich and poor, haves and have-nots, Republicans and Democrats, and the Republicans themselves, which I might say, and I can only say this at Bethlehem Baptist Church, I can never say this at my own synagogue, I'm kind of enjoying it. Fissile. A number of years ago, Sam Huntington wrote a book called The Clash of Great Civilizations, and he said that the 21st century will be marked by war and conflict between the great empires of the world. And as empires become more powerful, there will be greater conflict on a global scale, on an international scale. And I gave a sermon about that at Beth a number of years ago, and I've come to believe that Sam Huntington was completely wrong. 2016 will not be a year of clash of civilizations. It will be a year of fissile, of a clash within the civilizations. And that is what we need to confront. The real clash here in America is between those who have made it and those who somehow have been left behind. And we see within this country a growing population of those who are, how shall we say, super rich, and those who can barely struggle to put bread on the table. Fissile. The two major fissile that I see in the world is the struggle between the moderates and the radicals in this country, in the religious community. The struggle, I believe, will not be between Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The struggle, I believe, in 2016 and beyond will be the conflict between the radicals within the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim world and the moderates within the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim world. Between those who see no possibility for compromise and those who believe that the only possibility for peace is compromise and negotiation. One of the concerns that I have is within that radical world, when you negotiate and you compromise in the political world or the economic world, that's a virtue to give and to take and to kind of give a little bit of yourself in order to make peace. But if you are a radical and you believe that God has told you the truth, then you do not compromise. Because then you're dealing with the devil, and in my opinion, that is what we need to confront, because in this world, there does need to be compromise and peace and reconciliation, and radicals just don't want that. So the struggle in the fissile of the world, I'm sorry if I'm too intellectual right now and focusing on these issues, but the struggle is not going to be between the different faiths of the world. We understand that. I have more in common with the moderates within the Christian world than I do with the radicals of the Jewish world. And that's something we need to recognize. The truth is, all faiths have trouble with extremism. There are Christian extremists, there are Jewish extremists, and there are Muslim extremists. To deny this is to put our heads in the sand. No good comes from statements that deny the religious source of religious violence. No good comes from that. We all need to condemn it wherever we see it And the moderates within all faiths need to condemn the fanatics of all faith. I'm a great fan of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, I believe, saved the Western world. He said, "You know the difference between an idealist and a fanatic?" He said, "An idealist is willing to die for their own cause. A fanatic is willing to kill you for their cause." He was talking in the 1940s, and we are seeing more fanatics and less idealists. And we need to support the idealists and have the courage of all faith communities to condemn the fanatics. That is why I am so delighted that we are participating in Walking the Walk, so different faith communities can come together and learn from each other. And I've been working with Pastor Kwan so that we can have a meeting with our friends in the North Penn Mosque, so that we can, as we did together, Bethlehem Baptist and Beth Or, and by the way, Charles, let me correct you, it's not 20 years, it's 27 years. That's why I look the way I do. 27 years ago, we started building bridges. And I think the time has come for us to do that now, Christians and Jews, with our Muslim friends, primarily in the North Penn Mosque. The other fissiparousness that I see is between the secular in this country and the religious in this country. Now, I'm a Jew, and I have no illusions that the world is going to stop on Friday night and Saturday mornings for my worship service. I know I'm a minority, but when I see activities going on in the sport community and whatnot on Sunday morning, I begin to think to myself, the nuns, which means the people who have no religious faith, who write in the forms none, are growing in this country. And that concerns me tremendously. The fissiparousness will be taking place between those who have religious faith, who fill these sacred halls, and those who are at restaurants and sporting clubs. And Charles, could I ask you to do me a favor? Charles, when you see my members at Pumpernicks on Friday night, would you be so kind as to say, "Why are you not at services?" That's what a friend will do for you. So this past Saturday, I had the pleasure and the honor of saying a few words along with a litany of other dignitaries in Philadelphia as we installed Tanya Kwan as the president of the Baptist Ministers' Wives and Widows Union. And I had the pleasure of sitting next to a fellow that I had never met before, but I had heard of. His name was Robert Bogle, and he is the CEO and the editor of the Philadelphia Tribune. And he said something to me, and we talked for quite a while. It was a fascinating discussion, and he asked me, he said, and he looked me straight in the eye, as, in a way, and I started to get a little nervous, and he said to me, I read the Jewish Exponent every week. He said, I know what's happening in the Jewish community. He said, have you ever read the Philadelphia Tribune? And I said, no, I'm sorry, I haven't. And he said, that's the problem. Thank you. Give me a minute, would you? And he said to me, that's the problem with our society. And the word didn't come to me at the time, but it's fissiparousness. I read my newspaper, you read your newspaper. And you look at the world through your eyes, and I look at the world through my eyes, and that is not what Diversity Sunday should be about. And so I have not subscribed yet, but I went online and I read some of the articles. The greatest example I can think of as the antidote to fissiparousness is the friendship that Lori and I have with Tanya and Charles Kwan. As Charles has said, we are not just colleagues, we are friends. We see the world not through a similar faith perspective, but we look at the world with a clear understanding together of what needs to be done to make this country better, more just, to minimize the gap between the haves and the have-nots. We can be proud in our differences. I can wear a kippah in here proudly, and I know that this is not your way, but your celebration of me and my celebration of you is what will save us all. I was one of the few, you'll excuse me, white people in the room when Tanya was installed. And I absolutely loved it because it was a celebration of what is great in this country. It was a magnificent tribute to you, Tanya, and I, by the way, have seen some of the most magnificent hats. And I think I need to talk to Lori about getting some of those hats. My text for this morning is from the Hebrew prophets Malachi, chapter 2, verse 10. Do we not have all one Father? Did not God create us all? Why did we profane the covenant of our ancestors by being unfaithful to one another? What we need is a little more elbow rubbing and a little less parispneus, a little more of breaking bread together with adults and with youth. In nature, two things are going on at the same time, and I'd like you to think about this for a moment. In the cosmos, the universe is expanding. It's getting larger and larger each and every day, and the stars and the planets and the galaxies are spreading out, and astrophysicists argue that the center will not hold, and as it expands, it loses energy, and it will be lost. That's the theory. But on the subatomic level, atoms are rock solid. It takes incredible energy to produce fission, to break an atom apart. It seems to me that God is giving us a choice. Are we going to go the way of the cosmos and split apart and live in our little communities and read our own newspapers and have nothing to do with one another? Or are we going to celebrate diversity and be like an atom? Electrons, protons, and neutrons, all different, but all doing the will of God. Rock solid. Speaking of space, I want to leave you with a little metaphor. Now, I don't know about you. I was a big fan of David Bowie. And if I hear Major Tom one more time, I think I'm going to lose patience. But there was one particular posting I saw on Facebook of Major Tom. The International Space Station had one of the astronauts sing. Do you all know the song Major Tom? Right? Okay. So one of the astronauts started to sing the song, Ground Control to Major Tom, and it was a celebration of David Bowie. And in the background was a cosmonaut also serving on the International Space Station. Now, when Charles and I grew up, the cosmonauts and the astronauts were competitors. They were enemies. I grew up in the generation of Sputnik, and we were going to beat them. And now, the International Space Station, we have cosmonauts and astronauts working for peace and the betterment of society. It is the antidote to parispneus. May God bless us with our unity. May God bless us with strength. And may God bless us not to be the same, but to see the sameness in one another, despite our unique faith and racial perspectives. God bless Bethlehem Baptist Church and my dear friend, Reverend Charles Clark.
That is who we are. That is what Dr. King gave his life for. That is what Jesus Christ himself shared in his ministry when he met the Samaritan woman at the well, when he touched those who were the downcast, when he challenged the law. That's who we are. And I pray that you are seeking to make a difference through your faith in Jesus Christ.